Have you ever sat in a quiet room, maybe with the television humming softly in the background, and felt like the silence wasn't peaceful but empty? It's a strange thing, isn't it? The way life seems so full when we're younger, full of plans, of people, of noise, of running here and there, and then, almost without warning, it all slows down. The phone rings less often, the visits become shorter, and somehow, the days begin to stretch longer than they used to. The kind of long that doesn't always feel restful. You sit at your kitchen table, cup of tea in hand, and it hits you, you feel invisible. Not because anyone was cruel or meant harm, but because life moved on. Children grew up. Careers ended. People got busy. And somewhere in all that change, the sense of being needed, of being truly seen, began to fade. But you know, there's something you need to hear. Feeling lonely after 60 is not a sign of weakness. It's not your fault. It's not something to be ashamed of. It is human, it is real, and it's more common than most people would admit. What matters is what we do with it. There's a quiet strength in choosing to look at this chapter of life, not as the end of something, but the beginning of something else. A new space, carved out gently by time, where you get to decide what stays, what goes, and what grows next. Let me tell you about Evelyn. She's 67. Widowed 5 years ago. Her 2 adult sons live in other cities, wrapped up in their own families and careers. They love her, yes, but it's been months since they visited. Calls are quick, mostly around holidays, and the silence in between. It stretches on like an empty hallway. She used to fill her time caring for others, a caregiver for her husband through his illness, the dependable grandmother when the boys were younger, the volunteer who never said no. But now, that need has faded, and with it, so did a piece of her purpose. One day, Evelyn looked at the mirror and said something out loud she hadn't dared to admit before. I feel forgotten. It was hard to say. But naming the ache was the first quiet act of power, because it meant she was ready to do something about it, not by begging for attention, not by clinging to what used to be, but by turning inward and tending to herself. The first thing she did was simple. Every morning, before checking her phone, before turning on the news, before anything, she sat by the window, hands wrapped around her mug, and practiced gratitude. Not the forced kind. Not a list of things she thought she should be grateful for. Just one thing. From the heart. Some mornings it was the way the light hit the curtains. Other times it was a memory of her husband's laugh, or the smell of the jasmine bush just outside. These tiny moments became her anchor, and that small habit began to shift her focus. Loneliness didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip. Because you see, the mind is like a garden. After 60, it needs tending more than ever. When left alone, it fills with the weeds of regret and resentment. But when we plant presence, kindness, and reflection, even the quietest seasons bloom again. The second thing Evelyn did was harder, but just as transformative. She stopped saying yes out of guilt. It had become automatic over the years. Someone needed help. She jumped, even when she was exhausted, even when she wasn't asked kindly, even when it left her drained and resentful afterward. There was this lingering fear that if she didn't say yes, she'd be forgotten altogether, that people only remembered her when she was useful. But one afternoon, after driving 45 minutes to babysit without so much as a thank you, she sat in her car and cried, not because of what happened, but because of how small she felt. So the next time they asked, she paused, breathed, and said, not this weekend. I have plans, and she did. Plans to rest, to read, to walk through the park with no one rushing her. Something shifted that day. Her voice felt steadier, her back a little straighter. Saying no, kindly but firmly, was not pushing people away. It was honoring her own time, her own needs. That's not selfish. That's self-respect. And something interesting happened. Her sons began to ask, what are you up to this week, Mom? Instead of assuming she was always available, they started to treat her time with more value. Because she had started to value it herself. There's a quiet dignity in showing people how to treat you, not through confrontation, but through consistency. Now, none of this is about becoming cold or distant. It's about becoming whole. Loneliness, in many ways, is the space left behind by what we used to give away too freely. Our time, our energy, our presence. It's the echo of over-sacrifice. But that space doesn't have to remain empty. It can be filled carefully, lovingly with new habits, new boundaries, and a renewed sense of self. There's no rush, no deadline, no magic formula, but there is a truth that holds steady through it all. You are still here, you still matter, and your presence, even if it isn't always noticed by others, is a light that deserves to be tended. Even now, especially now, sometimes the ache we feel isn't just about who's missing, it's about the parts of ourselves we've lost along the way. Maybe it began years ago, in moments so small they went unnoticed. Like when you put someone else's needs above your own, thinking it was love. Or when you bit your tongue to keep the peace, thinking silence was strength. When you apologized for taking up space, even though all you wanted was to be included. Over time, these tiny sacrifices can add up, not to a life of regret, but to a life of disconnection from others and from ourselves. Laura knows that feeling too well. She's 71 now, but for most of her adult life, she was the reliable one. The dependable sister, the steady mother, the friend who never said no. People came to her for comfort, for favors, for advice, but rarely just to ask, "How are you doing?" And she didn't expect them to. Somewhere along the line, she started believing that her value came from how useful she was to everyone else. The idea of resting, of receiving, of being cared for in return, it felt foreign, almost selfish. But something in her shifted after her 70th birthday. The celebration had been small, just her and a cake she bought for herself. No calls from her kids that day, no visits. She wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of waiting for others to remember what she no longer remembered herself, that she was allowed to matter. The change didn't come loudly, it came in little choices. She began speaking more honestly, even when it felt uncomfortable. When a neighbor asked her to drive across town for a favor she couldn't manage, she simply said, "I'm not up for that today." No excuses, no over-explaining, just the truth, shared with calmness and respect. It was hard at first. She felt a pang of guilt, like she was letting someone down. But that feeling passed. And what came after? Relief. A quiet pride in finally standing up for herself, not with defiance, but with dignity. These small acts of self-honesty are habits, too. Habits of the heart. And that's something we often forget. Not all habits are routines of the body. Some are patterns of the soul. People-pleasing, for instance, is a habit. Saying yes when we mean no. Smiling when we're hurting. Holding it all together so no one sees us unravel. But every time we abandon ourselves to keep others comfortable, we water a seed of loneliness inside. Brandon, 66, spent his entire career as a high school teacher, beloved by students, respected by colleagues. But in retirement, he struggled. Without the daily structure and the sense of purpose that teaching gave him, the days began to blur together. He didn't talk about it. Of course, men of his generation often weren't taught how. Instead, he kept busy, mowed the lawn twice a week, fixed things around the house that didn't need fixing. But beneath the surface, he felt adrift. His daughter noticed it when she visited. He was quieter, slower to laugh, so she gave him something simple. A journal. At first, he scoffed. "What am I gonna do? Write poetry?" he joked. But one morning, he opened it anyway. Just a sentence or two at first. A thought about the morning air. A memory of his students. A feeling he hadn't spoken aloud. And in doing that, putting words to things he'd buried, he discovered something powerful. That emotional strength isn't about always being stoic. It's about being real. Loneliness doesn't only come from lack of company. It comes from feeling like we can't share the truth of who we are. That's why journaling, talking, creating, even crying when needed aren't weaknesses. They're acts of reconnection. One of the most radical things you can do after 60 is to stop apologizing for your emotions. They are not burdens. They are signals, honest, raw, and guiding. Melissa, 69, joined a watercolor class at her local community center, not because she was any good at painting, but because she missed feeling creative. The first day, she barely said a word. The others seemed to know each other already. But by the third week, she was laughing over coffee with a woman named Joyce, who also took up painting just to see what would happen. They started meeting every Tuesday, not just for class, but for conversation, real conversation, about fears, aging, joy, and change. Not surface-level chatter, but the kind of talk that makes you feel less alone in your skin. Sometimes, that's all it takes, putting yourself somewhere new. even if it's just a room down the street. Because proximity is the soil where new bonds can grow. Not every connection will bloom, but some will, and the ones that do, they're worth every bit of courage it takes to walk through the door. The truth is, we can't control who calls us, who visits, or who remembers, but we can control what we give to ourselves. Respect, kindness, time, and a willingness to heal not by waiting for others to change, but by coming home to ourselves. And healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a walk in the morning sun, a gentle no spoken without guilt, or the soft scratch of a pen moving across a page. Sometimes it's the way you look in the mirror and say, I matter, even when no one else is around to echo it. Because when you begin to believe it, when you truly stand in your own worth, something beautiful begins to happen. The world around you shifts. People respond to your energy, not your effort. They feel the calm certainty in your presence, and slowly, they begin to meet you in that space not out of obligation, but out of respect. This is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been, beneath the roles, the giving, the silence. It's about returning to your center and finding, to your surprise, that you were never really lost at all. You were just waiting for yourself. Sometimes, the most powerful shift in life doesn't come from what we say or do, but from how we show up. There is something different in a person who begins to live with quiet self-respect. You can feel it in the way they enter a room, not demanding attention, but not shrinking away either. They move through their days not needing to prove anything, but fully aware of their worth. And it's that presence, more than words or actions, that starts to shift the way others respond. When Evelyn, the widow who began her mornings with gratitude and started saying no without guilt, started carrying herself differently, something subtle began to happen. Her sons, who used to call only out of routine, started to linger a bit longer on the phone. They asked questions, not just out of politeness, but with genuine interest. They sensed something had changed, even if they couldn't put their finger on it. It wasn't because she confronted them or demanded more. It was because she stopped chasing approval and started living in alignment with herself. She wasn't trying to make them feel guilty. She wasn't trying to make them feel anything. She was simply being whole. And people notice that. They may not say it, but they notice. That's the beautiful thing about emotional restoration. It's not about revenge or teaching anyone a lesson. It's about showing up for your own life again, fully, gently, bravely. Brian, a 72-year-old who spent most of his life as a provider, used to wait by the phone every Sunday. That was the day his daughter promised to call. Sometimes she did, sometimes she didn't. And on the days she didn't, he would sit in silence, staring at the phone as if it had betrayed him. One Sunday, something changed. He got up early, pulled out his old vinyl records, and played the jazz he used to love. He cooked himself breakfast, nothing fancy, just eggs and toast, but made with care. Then he sat by the window and watched the neighborhood come alive. He didn't check the time. He didn't check his phone. He was there in the moment, in his body, in his life. His daughter did call that day. But by then, he wasn't waiting. He was living. And you know what? The conversation felt lighter. No tension, no guilt. Just two people talking. Because when you stop waiting to be loved and start loving the life you're in, the energy around you changes. It's not that the loneliness disappears entirely. It's that it no longer defines you. You begin to notice beauty in small things again. The sound of birds in the morning, the warmth of a soft sweater, the way your hands still know how to make the perfect cup of tea. These are not replacements for connection, but reminders. You are still very much alive. And being alive means you still have choices. Even now, you can choose to take a walk without a destination, just to feel the air on your skin. You can choose to sign up for that workshop, even if you feel awkward at first. You can choose to sit in a cafe with a book, simply because it feels good to be surrounded by life. These choices, small as they may seem, are declarations. They say, I'm not done yet. They say, I belong to this world. Tiffany, 68, joined a community choir even though she hadn't sung in public since she was in her 20s. The first rehearsal, she stood in the back, lips barely moving. But by the third week, her voice found its way back. Not because she was the best singer, but because she allowed herself to be part of something again. That's another habit worth mentioning. Participation. Loneliness grows in isolation, But fulfillment grows in involvement. You don't need to be the center of attention. You just need to show up consistently, even quietly. Whether it's volunteering once a week, helping at a local garden, or simply becoming a regular at the same grocery store where people begin to recognize your face. Human beings are wired for connection. But connection doesn't always come from deep conversations or family gatherings. Sometimes, it's just the wave from a neighbor, the nod from a stranger, or the smile from someone who remembers your name. What changes when you live for yourself isn't that others suddenly revolve around you. It's that you no longer shrink your life waiting for someone to fill it. You expand, you try new things, you rediscover old joys. And in doing so, you become magnetic not because you're chasing anyone, but because you're lit from within. There's a grace in aging that no one talks about enough. Yes, things soften. Yes, some doors close. But others open the kind you didn't even know existed. Doors to deeper peace, to real conversations, to simpler pleasures, to a kind of self-trust that only comes from having lived through so much and still choosing hope. Hope, after all, isn't loud. It doesn't shout or demand. It whispers. It's the quiet nudge that says, try again. It's the hand on your back that says, you're not too old. You're just in a new season. And in this season, you get to rewrite the story, not by erasing the past, but by choosing how it shapes you. So when the world feels quiet, when the calls are few, when the nights stretch long, remember this. You are not forgotten. You are becoming, you are learning, still, growing, still, loving, still. And you don't need to be loud to be heard. You only need to stand firmly in your light. Because that light, it's always been there, maybe dulled, maybe hidden behind years of self-sacrifice or pain, but it never left you. And now, it's time to let it shine again. If you're still here with me, I want you to know something. That means a lot. Not just because you stayed through the video, but because you gave yourself this time to listen, to reflect, to feel. That alone takes courage. And not everyone allows themselves that space. Sometimes the greatest act of strength after 60 is simply letting yourself be honest about the ache, about the silence, about the desire for more, not more things, or more noise, or even more people, but more connection, more truth, more warmth, more days that feel like they belong to you. And you deserve that. I don't know what brought you here today. Maybe it was one of those afternoons that felt too quiet. Maybe someone you love hasn't been reaching out like they used to. Maybe you've just been carrying something invisible, like sadness, or regret, or a kind of tiredness that sleep doesn't fix. Whatever it is, you're not alone. Truly, there are so many hearts, just like yours, quietly walking this same path. Hearts that gave everything to others and are now learning to give something back to themselves. Hearts that ache. Yes, but also hope. That's the beauty of this time in life. We're not chasing titles or trophies anymore. We're chasing meaning, and not the kind that comes in grand declarations, but the kind that lives in small, sacred moments. The morning light through the curtain, the way your coffee tastes when no one's rushing you, the feeling of laughter you didn't expect, but needed. Those are the moments that heal, the ones that remind you you're still here, and there is still beauty meant just for you. If something in this video spoke to you, if you felt seen, or comforted, or maybe just less alone, I'd love for you to share your story in the comments. You don't have to write much, just a few words, or even just a simple, "This is how I've been feeling lately." Sometimes saying it out loud, even in a quiet space like this, makes the weight just a little lighter. And if you want to stay connected, I would truly be honored to walk this journey alongside you. Click that subscribe button, not because I want numbers or likes, but because if this space felt safe, I want you to have a place to return to whenever you need it. A space where your voice is valued, where your feelings matter, where your story is always welcome. You've spent so much of your life being there for others. Now, let this be the chapter where you show up for yourself, not with guilt, not with fear, but with grace. Let this be the chapter where you wake up and think, this life, my life is still unfolding, and I am still allowed to find joy in it. There will still be quiet days. There will still be moments when the old pain whispers again. But now, you have something else alight inside you that doesn't depend on anyone else to shine. Keep tending to that light. Protect it. Nurture it. And trust that it will guide you toward more peace, more strength, and yes, more fulfillment. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are becoming. Thank you for being here. Truly, until next time, be gentle with yourself. You've earned that.